I used soil blocks exclusively for many years when I first began commercial farming. I learned about them in Elliot Coleman's book, The New Organic Grower, and never looked back. But one year, I had a bout of poor planning over the winter and couldn't find the ingredients when I needed them in the spring. So I broke down and started buying plastic seed cells and pre-made planting soil. Now, many years later, those plastic cells are broken to the point where they need to be thrown away, and I'm not going to replace them. The biggest trick with soil blocking is ensuring the mix is the right consistency. Too dry or too wet, and the mix won't stay in the blocker, or hold its shape after the blocks are expelled onto a tray. Elliot Coleman recommends a ratio of 1 part water to 3 parts soil mix, and he says hot water or warm works better than cold. Actually, in my experience, they both work the same in terms of success in block making. But Coleman's recommendation to use warm water is based on the idea that it's more comfortable for you, the block maker, who has to have your hands in the mix and on the blocker. The majority of your blocks are likely to be made in late winter and early spring when it's cold, so this makes sense. But since this is June, I'm going to use a bucket of water collected from a leak in the gutters. Like mixing mortar or cement, you need to add water slowly, and if you add too much, you need to add more dry material to balance it out. But once you get the right consistency, you can move on to actually making the blocks. Since I haven't used my soil blockers for many years, and they've been in storage in the garden shed, they're covered in cobwebs. Coleman recommends rinsing the blocker after each plunge. I don't do it that frequently. I put it back into the water if soil is sticking to it enough to impact the blocks, or if I need to mix more soil block mix, or get or adjust a tray. Like a knife tells you when it needs sharpening, the soil will tell you when it's time to rinse the blocker. The way soil blocks work is quite ingenious, taking advantage of the natural tendency plants have to keep their roots completely encased in moist soil. When roots hit a big air pocket, they stop probing in that direction and change course, finding more soil. Soil blocks take advantage of this by placing an airspace around each little seedling's roots. Leaving a seedling in there long enough will eventually fill the entire block with roots, but only tips will be sticking out the sides. In order for this to work, you need to remove any soil where the roots could find a path into another block. Otherwise, when you try to pull the blocks off the tray to plant, they'll be connected by roots, the breaking of which slows your plant down just when it goes into the garden. The biggest factor I've found for roots is beneath the soil blocks, so I remove the soil with a gloved hand, scraping away soil mix until I can clearly see the steel grid. Being that this is the first tray of soil blocks I've made in several years, I forgot about the glove. This mix will dry your hands out severely. I have waterproof gloves that I use only for this purpose, and I went and got them after the first tray. As I mentioned, it's been a few years since I made soil blocks, and I'm out of practice. Ideally, you don't want to squeeze blocks together because it may destroy the air tunnels between the grid. Once you've made a bunch, you get pretty good at placing them. I recommend you find, or build, trays that are just the right size. Don't forget to take into account the thickness of your blocker walls. You want to be able to fit them all on a tray without squeezing them together, but too much space between sets dries them out quickly. Another thing that will dry out your blocks is having trays without deep sides, meaning the side walls of your blocks are exposed to the sun and wind. These trays are a little bit too shallow, but they're perfect for transferring heat, and, as you can see, once I get my placement better, they'll hold the blocks exactly where they need to be, without squeezing. What I tend to do is use thin cardboard, like a cereal box. I'd rip off strips that are just the depth of the soil blocks, and wrap the entire block tray. Once you're done placing them on the tray, they're ready to plant. The perfect little seedling containers.